You're listening to Dead Air Podcast, part of splatterpictures.net.
What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knipe here with always
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 1989 cult classic, Intruder. Beep. The store is closing.
It is a cult that you were not part of, which is so weird to me, because if anyone's into a cult classic movie starring Sam Raimi with a guest appearance, and Ted Raimi, of course, and a guest appearance with Bruce Campbell, and some of the other just interesting things that are speckled along the making of this particular movie and the genesis of this movie, that it would have been on your shelves. It's weird to me that this is a newer find. It is definitely a Wes pick, but it's weird to me that you had not watched this before.
Yeah, I have this thing where as I've gotten older, you know, I've realized how much that I've missed in terms of being a horror fan, where some things completely crossed my threshold again and again and again, and I became obsessed with it. Meanwhile, there was tons of other stuff that I would see and then, you know, I'll check that out one day. I know the poster, I know the title, I've seen the box art. And then there's a smaller category of films, particularly from this era, which I have not seen hide nor hair of my entire life until it's plopped in front of me. Now, the good news for horror fans who like the older stuff, like me, I know you like older stuff too, but I wallow in it like a pig.
You do.
And the good news for people like that is the fact that Arrow and Synapse and Vinegar Syndrome and all of these premium physical release companies, Shout Factory, they find this shit out of obscurity and they put it in front of you. And even when that happened, I fucking missed it. So this was a really exciting find for me. And I'm sure there's horror fans listening to this show, particularly you see, oh, they're doing Intruder. This is one of my favorite films. And they're going to hear that I had never fucking heard of it. And they're going to be like, what? You call yourself a horror fan? Well, listen, I do. But I haven't seen everything. As much as some people like to think that I have. I've heard this. I've heard this from so many people throughout my entire life. Wes, I feel like you have literally seen everything. I feel like there's no movie that I can say to you that you are like, huh, I don't know that. And that's good, but it's also bullshit, because of course there's movies that I've never seen and never heard of, even in a genre that I love.
Yeah, with this particular one, you could have said, well, I haven't seen Intruder up until the last year, and that might have blown the minds of some people. But gatekeeping is such a weird, sticky ball that they can either say, oh, you've seen everything, so there's nothing I could suggest to you. And you could be like, well, this is a movie I've never seen. They're like, oh my God, you've never seen Intruder? What kind of horror fan are you? 1 second ago, you were too big of a horror fan. And now you don't have enough fucking goth points to join the horror club? Okay, whatever. It's shit. Really, it's total shit. But when I was suggested this movie from Howard of Ottawa Horror, I watched the first maybe 20 minutes of it and I wasn't feeling it. Wasn't interested. Wasn't my kind of movie. I wasn't having fun. Maybe I was looking for a different sort of movie. At that time, I was very interested in films from the French Extreme. I was very interested in the guinea pig movies, and I was very interested in quiet mumblecore. So it was kind of the opposite of all of that I was watching in heavy rotation at the time. So yeah, wasn't my cup of tea then. Today, though, I have a lot of fun with this movie. It's almost like having the Mystery Science Theater 2000 or Riff Tracks experience alone at home, but with an actually good movie.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. You in those days sounded like you were looking for extreme horror that was saying something. What the genre is capable of, and Intruder is more of what the genre is known for. And when you look at it from the perspective of a slasher film, just a slasher film, which I love, it has so much going for it that I am so shocked that it at least is not considered in the upper tier of slasher films. And even though when you do a Google search, we live in the world where everything is connected and we have the super memory that never forgets in the form of the internet. So of course there's 600 YouTube videos of people reviewing this forgotten gem, and there's so many articles and blogs and podcasts that you can listen to, like this one, that'll talk about this film, and it will become common knowledge. But I want to take you back, Lids. I want to take you all the way back to the year 1989. There's no internet except for smart people's basements, maybe. And there's no social media of any kind. Maybe Fango talked about this a little bit, but if you didn't have a subscription, or if you missed that issue, you don't know about it. And you know what you were in 1989, Lydia, and you know what I was, and do you know what every horror fan was in 1989? You were enough. You were enough. You knew enough. You knew more than any other person around you about horror movies, and no one judged you for not knowing things, and no one judged you for not seeing things. And people would forgive you because I know you used to watch horror movies with your friends, or one friend in particular, or with your mom, and you would rent stuff, and it would be an exciting exchange of ideas as opposed to a judgmental exchange of ideas. And I think the only reason why I'm focusing so much on this is because I've really been thinking about, we did Spree last episode, and we were talking about social media and the connectivity of the world, and how that makes us feel as people, that we're not enough unless we have a big online presence. Or at least that's how I feel sometimes. And then I was looking at my Twitter feed, and I was really noticing people talking about, I've never seen this before. This is a first time watch for me. And I had this thought, Lids, every time I see people saying, this is a first time watch for me, and it's like Nightbreed or something. I'm just like, wow, that's very brave of you. That's very brave of you to admit that. Because I know what the comments and the thoughts are, especially if I come to you, like, you follow me on Twitter, you follow me on Instagram, you follow you or whoever that has, spooky avatar, and you say in your bio that you like horror movies or dark fiction or anything like that. So people think that you're an expert that knows everything. But there's so much to know, and so many things that are produced nowadays, that there's no way that you can know everything. And there's so many current things that you would be forgiven to missing stuff in the past. But you don't want to forget the past, Lids. Not to horror fans, people that still fucking watch shit on VHS, for Christ's sake. You don't want to tell them that you don't know what Intruder is. You don't want to tell them that you missed a really important or really cool slasher. They're going to call you names, Lids. They're going to call you stupid. They're going to say you're not a real horror fan. And I've just been really interested in this idea because the reason why I wanted to talk about Intruder, really seriously, and I'll stop hogging the mic in a second, was I was feeling very burnt out on horror, like very burnt out on horror. And it started, honestly, if I'm being truthful, it started just about a couple of months into the pandemic. I don't know what it was. I just wasn't in the mood for it. And honestly, if not for this show, like you and I took a huge hiatus, but when we weren't recording at all, I wasn't watching any fucking horror movies. I don't even know what I was doing, disassociating on my phone, I guess. And then when we got back into recording, I honestly was trying to keep up watching horror movies, but I just fucking couldn't be bothered. Like I'd watch like Friday the 13th a few times because that's what I do when I'm stressed out. But like I'd kind of lost like the interest in really watching horror. Does that ever happen to you?
It does to a certain extent because there's different kinds of horror to watch. And I have the same problem with reading books where I get tired of Richard Lehman books, if that's possible. Yes, it's possible. And those sort of bubblegum 80s slasher, extreme violence books I get tired of. So then I have to read something a little more high concept or a gothic or something, a vampire story that is a high concept vampire story, and then go back to the things I like, which is like those slasher things. But luckily there's a whole bunch of subgenres to choose from. Or you can go with like a ghost story. Same with movies, of course. If I get tired of watching too much Asian splatter film, then I can turn the tables and watch some very modern mumblecore or that elevated horror that we love so much. And if I get really tired of that, which happens quite quickly, I can go back to slashers in a heartbeat or rewatch favorites, because like with the Friday the 13th, I can go back and watch all kinds of really cool horror movies and old franchises, and Halloween, I could watch that a million times and never be tired of it. So I don't know if I've ever not watched horror, but there is a fatigue, for me, subgenre fatigue entirely, because I've never, I don't suddenly get into like, well, I'm going to watch a bunch of comedies, or I'm really into historical romances all of a sudden. Like the genre doesn't switch, but the subgenre definitely does.
I think in and around Halloween of last year, where I sometimes I'm like, October, I've talked about this before on the show. I was like, I feel a lot of pressure. I have to be really spooky this month. Like I have to like put out a lot of content.
You're October every month of every year.
I know. Thank you. But I feel that way. This is not something that I feel like people are pressuring me into. This is my own psychoses. And I was so burnt out. I didn't really want to watch any horror movies. And so I didn't watch like a horror movie a day. I tried, but I was just like, I don't know. And then I get home from work and then I like look at my phone or I eat something. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm tired. I'm just going to bed. And then I wake up and I'm like, well, I'll have to work. And that was kind of it. And then it was getting to the point where I was wondering, why do I even have this Shudder subscription? And I was like, well, I have the Shudder subscription in case there is something that I should be watching, like either for the show or, something will spark my interest. And I don't know what compelled me to go onto Shudder, but I did. And they had a bunch of like slashers on, and that they had added, and Intruder was one of them. And I vaguely remember seeing the artwork that they're using. I don't know where on the internet I saw it. I certainly didn't remember the name of the fucking film, but I decided to click on it and read the description. And I was like, a slasher movie in a grocery store overnight. And it came out in 1989, and Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi and Ted Raimi is in it. And it's directed by Scott Spiegel. What the fuck is going on? I've never heard of this. So I clicked on it, and without too much hyperbole, it was a fucking magical experience. I was brought back to being a kid in the like this, like, when I would be watching movies like this, it would probably be more like the early to mid 90s. Maybe I was like, oh, a scary movie. I hope there's some boobs in it. Spoiler alert, there's not. But that's okay, because I don't need that kind of stuff. I'm not some creepy perv. I was, though. But I was delighted by it. I was delighted by this film in its entirety, and like seeing its flaws. It's not a perfect narrative, but it certainly gets the job done. And then there's this added joy I got to watching people badly work overnight in a grocery store. And I rarely have this kind of insight as to how people are working, the way that they're doing things, who's doing what. It was so baffling to me. And then, Lids, the next thing on top of that, all those old 80s boxes for all the packaging and shit like that. this was just a great experience for me all around. And I came at the other end of this film excited in a way about watching a horror movie that I had not been excited about in a very, very long time. And no, it's not me getting excited about elevated horror or something from A24 or the latest cool thing that everyone's talking about. It is just bullshit from the 80s. And if anything was going to rekindle my excitement for the genre, it was going to be something like that, and not something that was made recently to remind us of the 80s.
Yeah, you want the genuine article, and you've definitely got it in this film. It has K&B effects, basically, with a really good gore that actually escalates through the movie, like any good horror movie, but the quality of the effects escalates. You have almost like a whodunit, sort of a typical slasher with knives, big, sharp, shiny knives. That's one thing I really love about this particular movie is the use of big, fucking, sharp, shiny knives. That's what we want. That's why I like Michael Myers so much. You want big, sharp, shiny knives. There was once again for the people in the back, as the kids say. But yeah, it is the genuine article. And no real slasher homage can do it quite like a movie from 1989 can when done well. And we have gone over quite a few in the history of splatter pictures. We've reached back into the vault for old horror movies that were the sorts of things that we had seen on video rental shelves when we were younger, and the things that we tried to watch here and there as we've aged, and trying to fill in those gaps. It's so crazy to me that it's almost like you were existing in a separate dimension where this movie didn't exist, because it is so definitely made for you, not only with its cast and its style, and like I said, like just the way that it is and its progeny, but that it takes place in a grocery store overnight, which is so your life. There's very few stories that take place in grocery stores overnight. Mm-hmm. And sure, you have Bruce Campbell, Shop S-Mart from Evil Dead, but that doesn't quite do it. That's not quite right. It's not a grocery store proper, and it's not at night, and the whole story doesn't take place in there. There's a book by Christopher Triana and Ryan Harding called Night Stalkers, which I need to read, which is something like that. And there was a few stories by Axel Barnes, another extreme horror author, that take place at night in a grocery store with the staff. But those is literature. There's very few movies. Like, I can't think of a horror movie that takes place. I can think of more horror movies that take place at night with the night shift in fucking police stations than I can in grocery stores.
Yes, you're quite correct about that. I always go to the best case scenario for grocery store at night is you're going to get a mall at night. So an indoor mall is very classic. It wasn't until Netflix did those Fear Street movies. The first of the Fear Street movies takes place, the whole thing takes place at a mall, but the climax of the film takes place at a grocery store where one of the characters works. So, and there was me just being like, they're at a grocery store. Look at all the products. I know what that is. I know what this is. Oh my God. Like they're taking her to, that's the bread slicer. What are they going to do with that? Oh no, her head. Like it was very exciting. And maybe one of the reasons why I like those Fear Street movies so much is because just like a little bit of, like, it sounds so stupid, a little bit of representation. That's embarrassing to say, but it was the fact that this movie existed. And even if, so obviously I haven't worked overnights in a grocery store my whole life. When this movie was new, I would have been a little kid, 8. I think I was 8 years old in 1989, maybe 9. No, I was way younger than that. It doesn't matter. I was pretty young in 1989, but my first job was a produce clerk when I was 16 years old. So even then, when the methods of them doing stuff and the way the store looked was closer when I was 16 years old in 1989, I would have just as much enjoyed this then. Now I look back on this film shot so long ago and just being like, oh yeah, I remember those pricing guns, and oh my God, look at that box baler. I haven't seen one of those that look like that in years and years and years. And this was shot in a real functioning grocery store. And it was based off of the grocery store that Scott Spiegel worked in when he was growing up with some very familiar friends of his in Michigan, the Raimi brothers and Bruce Campbell. And once you learn his connection, well, of course, being working on Evil Dead, and like both on and off camera, because he was a fake Shemp for a few things in Evil Dead, and all the cameos that he's done over the years with Sam Raimi films. This casting all of a sudden made sense, because initially when I was watching this movie, I was shocked at the cast. The cast is absolutely insane. The linchpin is the director and how all these people got together. And I thought, oh, when I see Sam Raimi, oh, this is going to be a fucking cameo. He's going to be in the movie for 4 seconds, and you got to keep your eye out or something like that. And Bruce Campbell's going to be in the movie more, I was convinced, because he's traditionally the actor. And it's reversed, because Sam Raimi was in the... I couldn't believe how much he's in this movie. He's a fucking main character. And the people who are more traditionally actors, like Ted and Bruce, they're not in the movie as much, although Ted is in the movie quite a bit too.
Ted is the reason I turned this movie off the first time I watched it. I got 20 minutes into this movie, and I was already thinking, like, I don't know, because like I said, at the time I just wasn't feeling this. And as much as I appreciate the Raimi brothers' contributions to film, horror and otherwise, with that watermelon scene, he's cutting the center out of a watermelon and sloppily grabbing it with his hands and sloppily eating it. And I have a real aversion to sloppily eaten things in film. And I was like, I'm done. I should have stuck around, because I did enjoy this very much. It was fun. It's not the best horror movie in the entire planet, but it is very, very fun. And I like the story. I like the killer. I like the kills. I like a lot about it. So if I would have just stuck around. So if you're listening to us talk about this movie and thinking it's not for you, I'd say still give it a chance. Just try and, if you get to that point like I did, that watershed moment is kind of right after that, because that's where the story really ramps up. It's not just boyfriends and girlfriends quarreling and different people meeting and someone getting cranky about the store and the owners and all of this stuff, and someone who just got out of jail. Like, all of that stuff does set the scene for what's coming in the movie, sure, like any good storytelling, but the horror movie takes place after that scene. If I would have just watched another 5 minutes, I probably would have watched it through the first time.
By the way, if any of you are cutting watermelon in produce and you want to grab yourself a little taste, first of all, don't do that. That's stealing. They will fire you. But if you'd like to do that, cut it in half and then cut a slice off one of the ends. No one will remember how long that watermelon is, but they certainly will remember an entire chunk of the center missing from it.
Yeah, it was just wrong and gross in every level to me, and it was not very horror movie-esque. There are quite a few scenes in this that are just pointless conversations that are done at weird camera angles. It's a lot of camera playing, and I guess we'll talk about that, because that's one of the things that kept me very entertained throughout this movie, and probably would have turned me off the first time I watched it, because I'm like, okay, so this is students having fun with a camera. That's what this is. First time with a different lens, I guess.
In a weird way, you're not wrong, because this film was a remake, technically, of a Super 8 film called Nightcrew that Scott and the Raimi brothers made when they were kids. And they, I guess, all of a sudden they have budget and everyone's established, because it should be clear that the phenomenon of Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 had happened for everyone here. They had gone and become very well known, not very rich, but very well known based off of Evil Dead. And so by the time that they were in this, it would have been a real boon to have Sam Raimi and Ted Raimi, and the most recognizable person, Bruce Campbell. The one thing that I will say to anyone listening to this is, if you're like me, is that Bruce Campbell? Is that Bruce Campbell? Does he just have his hair weird? Oh, is that Bruce Campbell? Oh, is that Bruce Campbell? Oh, these characters have shown up. Is one of these guys Bruce Campbell? I was very heavily distracted by looking for Bruce Campbell like he's fucking Where's Waldo. And don't bother. It'll be obvious when he shows up. Just watch the fucking movie as is. But fuck all that, Liz. Fuck it all. What is this movie even about anyways?
This movie is about how it's very important to have key holding managers on every single shift available, so that not only the managers or owners or whoever that are off-site or sequestered in the ivory tower, so to speak, within the grocery store, are the only people with keys. Your main key holder should be on site on the floor, not elsewhere or off-site, and they should always be a backup key holder at all times, because the Nightcrew, who is stalking and not goofing around stealing beer or making out by any means, because very trustworthy crew you need here, things can happen and you need to have a key holder on the floor and a backup key holder at all times, guaranteed, and the store should be locked and closed if you can't do that. I don't know much about retail. That's just my take on it, because it seemed that no one had a fucking key except the one manager.
That is not very atypical in those days. Nowadays, you can unlock the doors yourself. The difference, cameras and electronics have changed the business totally, right? So let's start with the stealing of food that happens in this. The notion that employees at a grocery store treat the grocery store kind of like the refrigerator. You just grab things and eat it. That is true of the old days. It was very common for Nightcrew people to just kind of eat whatever. Now, when I'm working and I'm so hungry that I'm very distracted, I can't concentrate. Sometimes I come into work without eating my dinner and then I'm awful. I will go and grab something with a barcode, because at 3 a.m. they run the caches and I can pay for it. I won't eat like an apple because that's by weight and there's no barcode on it. And so no one will really know how much that apple actually was going to cost. So it technically is theft, but if it's got a barcode, you're okay. So I like to eat like the pre-made sandwiches, or like if I'm being a bad boy, I might grab a thing of muffins or donuts. But that tends to make me kind of sick. So I try not to do that. Plus, Cassandra's listening. I don't ever do that. So don't worry about it. But I try to grab myself something good. But yeah, this whole, like the amount of food stealing that goes on in this, I was like, good Lord, there's no cameras in this store. And you can tell, because like the idea that someone is just pounding back like 6 beers while they're working.
Which is mental to me. I like you had mentioned, the labels on the packages from these old 80s products, and breakfast cereal specifically, because I was in a household where Frosted Flakes and honeycomb were once every couple months treat. Sometimes around our birthdays, we would get a box of sweetened cereal. Otherwise, it was unsweetened wheat puffs and Raisin Bran, maybe. That was our sweet treats. We had Rice Krispies and cornflakes. That was like it for cereal. And we were encouraged to eat oatmeal, like proper breakfast foods. So we didn't have like all these sweet treats. And I remember being kind of transfixed by like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I don't think I tasted till I was an adult. I didn't taste Captain Crunch till I was at least 18 years old. And like seeing all of those cereal boxes is crazy to me in a way, because it does remind me of like what importance I put on marketing at that point because of Saturday morning cartoons, right? So it's very much Saturday morning cartoon memorabilia for me.
The cereal gets a lot of business in this film. I was thinking about it from a practicality standpoint. So I was looking at the cereal aisle as something that would be very easy to face. It's easy to line up the products to make it look good. If you were looking at how they were facing some of the other aisles, that seemed to be what they wanted. Face the aisles, make sure that the aisles look full. There's no air. They don't want any air. So you got to double stack things to hide the shape, to hide the fact that you're lower on product. So you want to have like a solid front to everything. And cereal is just easy. That's like first, if you're either going to be working detergent or cereal or chips when you first start working overnight at a grocery store. That's what you're going to be stocking. It's the easiest stuff to fuck with. And that's how come they keep knocking it over. I can also tell in some scenes that they were just trying to fill space with whatever, because in an aisle that was mostly flour, right next to some flour was a single box of Fruit Brute. And I was like, oh man, that is a very rare flavor of the General Mills Monster cereal. And every time they went back to the cereal aisle, I was like, do they have any of the other Monster Mills cereal? No, that entire aisle does not have any of the Monster cereals except for one random aisle in the store that had one fucking box of Fruit Brute in it. And I was just very distracted by that. When we open on this film, we have a grocery store, the Walnut Lake grocery store, closing up shop for the night, getting the last of the customers out. So much of this is very much how grocery stores close today. The best example is two cashiers having a very intimate conversation with each other about guys and their dating lives, while some snarky old man is like, am I interrupting something? Because what customers of grocery stores need to understand is you're all NPCs to us. You don't exist. I could do anything. I used to tell the new employees who were like, oh, keep your voice down. And I was like, what? These people don't matter. And I would literally drop everything I was doing and I would start stomping around the aisles with my arms flailing and making monkey sounds. And I was like, no customer even looks in my direction. I was like, see, they don't think we exist because they're NPCs. They're not going to react to anything that I do. So you're fine. Don't worry about it. I don't do that anymore, but that was younger Wes. That's what he used to do. And we're introduced to Jennifer, and she has got an ex-boyfriend, Liz, that's hell-bent for leather. He's got a leather jacket, and he's a no-good-nick. And he's not a no-good-nick with a heart of gold. He's a dickhead who she broke up with many a moon ago, but won't stop calling and writing letters, Lids. He's getting some paper together with scrawling on it, primitive symbols. Who knows what they say? But he's mad that she's not returning his calls or returning his letters. And so he goes to the grocery store and starts some shit. And then he gets dogpiled by everyone in the grocery store.
He gets absolutely dogpiled. He's a no good that won't take no for an answer. And I think it's done fairly tastefully. She's forceful and she's at work, so she shouldn't slap him. He's still technically a customer. And they have their words, and she's like, you owe me for the cigarettes that you just bought. You know, that sort of thing. She's being professional about it, but firm and standing her ground. And he hadn't tried anything physical to a certain point, but the minute he does, yeah, everyone in the store jumps on him. And I think it's quite brutal. The fight scene that ensues is kind of hilarious, and this is your first taste of the wild camera angles and the oddly choreographed fight scenes that will persist, and it becomes kind of laughable. I had a full-on nonstop belly laugh when the cops start banging on the door later, but be that as it may, it's already elicited giggles just because of the way that the fights are choreographed and the obscene amount of camera angles used for some of these scenes. But the acting is not that bad. You know, it's really honestly not that bad. And the two girls really carry the heavy lifting as far as the better acting goes. The no good Nick Craig is actually a really fine actor too. My only complaint to this point is that the leveling of the volume of this particular film. And I don't know that there's much that they could do aside from a remastered release, if one were on the table, to fix that, because I found that the volumes of some of the musical stings, which were really great, I found out later that the music is all sort of canned. It's all like, there's no composer for this film. It's just canned music that they picked and chose what to use. But the music is quite loud, and sometimes the talking is kind of low. So that was my only complaint up until this point. But entertaining. Oh my gosh, these fight scenes are something that I could achieve if I were to decide to make a film tomorrow.
There's we get our first taste of Sam Raimi. He's not a main character, but he's in the whole film. He's the butcher. And there's, when that dude is on screen, you can definitely tell that he is doing his own thing. And all the stories that I had ever heard, like through Bruce Campbell's autobiographies that he had done, about how Sam Raimi is essentially like this weird living cartoon. The way he talks, the way he carries himself. He stumbles into this fight like he has no idea what's going on, and immediately gets tossed ass over tea kettle into like a Diet Pepsi display. And I was just like, yeah, if anyone was going to do that fall, it was going to be Sam Raimi. And just the way he carried himself was so unnatural compared to everybody else, where it would almost be, is he trying to be drunk? Or he's like, I don't even know what's going on here, guys. Very entertaining. And again, through this entire crowd scene, because there's so many male characters on the screen right now, I'm like, where's Bruce Campbell? Who's he? Because if Sam Raimi's in this, like as a character with dialogue and all that shit, Bruce Campbell's got to be around here somewhere. Not quite yet.
Now, speaking of Sam, Ted, Bruce, Spiegel, you had mentioned something to me, and I had looked on Wikipedia. We have some of our own lore about all of these people and the movies that we love that they've been in, or that they've produced or filmed or directed or written, all of those things. One thing that we do know is that all those guys spent a lot of time watching Three Stooges, and you had shared with me a tidbit about that gentleman who was at the cash, that old dude who had said, "Am I interrupting something?" Tell the audience, if they're listening and are as big of fans of the Raimis as we are, who know what a fake Shemp is, tell the audience the story of the little gentleman.
That man is or was a legendary character actor in Hollywood. He has been in hundreds upon hundreds of films and dates back so far into cinema that he was a regular in the Three Stooges shorts. He often played a bystander who was, troubled or bothered or commenting on the antics of the Three Stooges. All six of the Stooges throughout their careers worked with this cat. His name was Emil Saitkin. And he used to have a famous line that I can't quite get right in my head at this point, but it was essentially, "Why don't you hold each other's hands?" Which is what he says when he's trying to get through this couple who is sort of blocking him. He was famous for saying that line in the Three Stooges shorts. And it makes absolute sense that when Scott Spiegel had this opportunity to direct, and then all the Raimis and Bruce Campbell was there, all their friends were together, they're like, fuck it, what if we can get somebody who worked with the Three Stooges to be in this film? And so they got him as the bit part at the very beginning, as this little old man, who you get the sense in the film is somebody, because he's got a lot more dialogue than just some hurried old man at the beginning who's just he would just be a glorified extra. And then you'd think to yourself, why is this guy getting so many lines? And then I looked it up, and that's what I discovered.
That makes so much sense, because yes, he does have sort of almost like a Stephen King in his own movie, or Karloff invited to do something, or something like that, where it's like this older actor that is obviously a name of some sort. But yeah, I'd have never guessed, because I love that story. I love that because I was never a Three Stooges fan. My father and my uncle were very much, so I saw a little bit of it in the living room as I was passing by, because it's not something I would sit down and watch with them like a Bruce Lee movie. But like, so I'm very aware of that, and I'm very aware of their love for that slapstick and fake shemps because of reading the Bruce Campbell book. So I thought that was so cool. So cool.
Yeah. It was just, it really started to illustrate what I think makes this film so special to me, and why the more I find out about this movie, the more I love it. The more it seemed like just a bunch of friends getting together who had an opportunity. Let's make a movie. Let's make a type of movie that's really popular these days. Let's make a slasher movie that we tried to make in the old Super 8 format. And it strikes me, I don't know for sure, but it strikes me as something that Scott Spiegel would have been like, man, like, I want to direct this movie. Like, do you got any ideas? And then like, what if we remade the old Super 8? And he's like, okay, well, you know, what if I got Sam and Ted and Bruce to all do that? But they would kind of made it pretty big at that point. And they all said yes. They all decided to come and do this silly little movie. And I think no matter how much 80s nostalgia modern times tries to shove down our throats, and I don't mean that in a bad way, I like a lot of that stuff. I like the Fear Street movies. I like Stranger Things. I like these things. I liked the It movie. Like, I think they're very good. But at the same time, the number one thing, the Summer of '84 is another good one. A lot of the times what people are trying to capture cannot really be recaptured, because at the end of the day, you understand that you're looking at somebody trying to sell you a product that you've already bought, and you bought it from people already who were just trying to make a movie. And so they were just trying to do something that they think would make a lot of money, as opposed to like, or to be serviceable for the time, as opposed to, I'm trying to sell you something that other people did better, and there's nothing else that I'm trying to sell you here except for the nostalgia. And I don't mean, like, I know it sounds, I don't know if I'm making any sense, Lids, but like, I don't want it to sound like, I don't mean to make it sound like I think what modern stuff is doing is shitty. But I am saying is like, there's an authenticity to the older stuff that was made in the time to not be anything other than what it was, just a horror movie. And I think you can't package it. You can put as many Walkmans and Converse sneakers and bikes with high handlebars as you want. You can put as many musical stings of Kate Bush that you want into something, but it's never really going to be the same. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I think that a lot of times in the 80s, they weren't worried about making a timely film. We're hyper aware of that because we know that if we show the Motorola flip phone in our movie from 15 years ago, people are going to have it instantly dated when 3 months later an iPhone comes out. Mm-hmm. So we're always super hyper aware of like when a movie was filmed or how old something was or when what car came out and all that. They didn't worry about that so much back then because people drove the same car for 15 years. People had the same black telephone from Ma Bell that sat on the same spot on the counter or attached to the wall if you were one of those kind of people. You know, like that shit stayed really static for much longer periods of time, and we weren't at the whims of this 6 to 18 month turnover with our belongings and technology and clothing and all that stuff. So we're more hyper aware of that now. So all this nostalgia throwback just feels so fucking cozy to people. I don't. I feel kind of uncomfortable watching nostalgic, air quotes, films and stuff because it was not a good time. It was absolutely not a good time in so many ways. So it's just creepy to me. I'd much rather watch something that was actually filmed in that time. I don't get weird fuzzies nostalgia except for remarking on things like, wow, the cereal aisle is such a trip to me, and to sort of parse out what I thought about cereal boxes as a child and stuff like that. I think that's interesting. And I don't get that from the Uncanny Valley version of it, from something like Stranger Things, Fear Street, which are great, like fun. I watched the first season of Stranger Things. It was great. Fear Street series was really interesting. I liked it a lot. It was gory. I liked it. But for nostalgia reasons, it's not what I wanted. If I wanted a nostalgic movie, which I don't, I'd rather watch like something for real that doesn't feel put on or someone else's sanitized version of that time. But yeah.
Speaking of gory, how you want to talk about these kills, Lids, because I think a slasher is only as good as its kills. You can even get away with kind of a mundane slasher if the kills are really, really good. And these kills have entered the realm of the Prowler to me as some of the best, most graphic and gory kills that I can really ever remember. This version of the film that we're watching, or we watched, has more footage in it than what was available to people on VHS. They had cut version of it. I don't know how much was cut, but I'm assuming it was probably some of the gore scenes. So it really changes the whole context of the film. It's what elevates My Bloody Valentine. When you watch the properly uncut version of My Bloody Valentine, my God, there's no comparison. You want to watch that one. That's got all the kills in it. This also has so many fucking iconic kills, but that's what I think. What do you think?
I think it's a 7 or 8 minute difference. So that's a lot of time. You'll hear, oh, the uncut version, it's 57 seconds of more insanity. and people flock to that. Or like 2 whole minutes of footage, Wes. You got to watch the extended version, the director's cut for those 2 fucking minutes. This has something like 7 or 8 minutes of stuff that was cut. I think the original release is 81 minutes and the uncut release is 89 or something like that. So that's a lot. That's a lot. And they do linger on a lot of kills. We get to see someone on a meat hook several times for like full minutes on screen. Mm-hmm. I think that sort of stuff would have been cut. Luckily, we got to see it without any cuts, because I don't know. It's not that it would have been a boring movie, because the kills are long and drawn out, protracted. Some of them are good scrambling fights with killer. Really enjoy that. But the first bits of gore we see, and the bit of blood here and there we see, is just like a little like amuse-bouche. It's a little like grape with a piece of watercress wrapped around it, and you pop it in your mouth and you're like, that's interesting. And then by the time we're done, we have a full-on pig on a spit at a luau kind of thing going on with the amount of gore and blood and the really, really graphic kills in this. So I really enjoyed that quite a lot.
We learn that this local grocery store, which is very strange because this is obviously depicted as a fairly small town. Everyone kind of knows each other. Everyone's dated each other. Everyone's been around. They all go to the same parties and shit. This grocery store is closing up shop. You see, the 2 owners are selling it off, callously selling it off, but they're not so callously because they have a fairly small working crew. There's probably people that weren't scheduled that day, but there were, it seems, it's a few people, and they're all going to get a bonus when the place gets sold. Toss them a little money. They'll get a nice little job recommendation, and they're kind of read the riot act. Now, I would be very interested to know if that situation happened in my store. Well, they would just disperse us because the company owns many stores in Canada, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal for someone like me. But for them, some of them talk about, I just got a pay raise. I was on my way to get 2 weeks vacation. That's what Sam Raimi says. Is Randy the Butcher. Randy the Butcher.
As opposed to Produce Joe.
Produce Joe is so good. If I had known about this movie when I was a teenager, I would have insisted that people call me Produce Joe. People are talking about seniority and people are talking about all these things, and I'm like, oh man, this is exactly the types of conversations that we would have if this was going to happen to us. So again, I'm really putting myself into this position because it's so easy for me to do that. One of the things that I'll say is quite interesting about this entire store's operation is it seems that the employees have to work pretty long. Some of them are Nightcrew, clearly some of them are Nightcrew, but a lot of them seem to be working like overlapping, like they're working while the store is still open. That's not my experience, But having like, for example, if you have cashiers running the store until it closes, they're going to be in the store for maybe 15 to 30 minutes maximum after the store closes before they're allowed to go home, after they've cleaned their caches and they have to go do their money thing. Like they have to, count the cash and shit like that. Once that's all over with, they can go home. And then it's just us freak shows. They do lock the perimeter up pretty tight. But again, for us, it's all electronic. If, for example, Lids, you were in the store past 11 o'clock, I could let you out myself. I don't have any keys. It just turns and then it opens. Worst case scenario, sets off the alarm. But if people are dying around me, maybe setting off the alarm isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have these guys who now their job is to stock shelves, although the shelves all look pretty stocked. And the way that they're stocking is very funny. They're not dragging skids out, but it looks like every now and again, each employee has like a box, like Ted Ramey, Produce Joe, has a box of watermelon that he's cutting in half. And I'm like, what is this? Like, is this your 8 hours right here? Cutting some seeded watermelon and spitting out the seeds like some kind of food pervert. Like, is that all you're going to do? Again, like the point is to not stock shelves, but it is interesting. I've heard that other stores have very light workloads, and I was just wondering, is this accurate to people who say they have very light workloads? Like, are they just putting up one box of cereal and stacking it so monstrously bad? But we don't have time to worry about that, Lids, because old Linda, one of the cashiers, is heading out for the night, and she's going to head off to her car, and she's not going to make it very far.
No, she's not. And what's great is that they have already called the police at one point on Craig. And he's also creeping around the store. And we have this idea that Craig is maybe even somewhere in the store, in the attic, where Bud had smoked the wacky tobacco at one point. Because people overshare their observances in this film like, wow, you would not believe the amount of pointless conversations. I guess it's supposed to be character building, but it's just kind of weird. But at least it's entertaining. But yeah, she has to get home with her Corona for her boyfriend, husband person, and he doesn't like it when she's late, so she's hustling out of there. Like you said, people spend 15 to 30 minutes, maybe maximum, if they aren't hightailing it out the door at the end of their shift. She's friends with Jennifer, so she's like had a little chit chat, and they've had that excitement with Craig and had to call the police and all that stuff. So she's out there, doesn't make it very far.
You know, when people are stocking the shelves and the first like very graphic murder happens, it's interesting that they kind of save it for being as graphic as it is. They don't save it for the first kill, or they don't save it in the immediate opening moments of a film. Sometimes slasher movies like to do that, right? They like to kick you in the balls a little bit to let you know the level of gore that you have to look forward to. Maybe it gives you an opportunity to walk out the door if you don't want to. But man, that store manager getting his eye jammed down on that little receipt spike thing, fuck, that was good. I love that scene so much.
And I like that it comes after a bit of tension. Like the first kill outside doesn't really have tension related to it, except for maybe it's a girl carrying a bunch of bags out to her car. Like it's dark, maybe there's an element of danger depending on where you are and who you are. With the spike through the eye, the two managers have just had this conversation because Bill, the manager who owns 49%, is not behind selling the store, where the other manager who owns 51% is. And they've just had an argument, like a big argument, and they've had like scuffles outside because Craig has come back and all that. Like there is a lot of tension going on at the time. So having that kill happen so closely after with a spike through the eye trauma always gets everybody. I don't know if the Raimi brothers just left a lot of eye trauma because it seems to happen. There's an eyeball later that is very Raimi-esque. I don't know what it is with them and eyeballs, but the spike through the eyeball is very believable. Lots of blood everywhere too. They do not skimp on the blood. There's even scenes later on that are almost like anime levels of blood, but here it's still believable. We're still in the realm of like creepy black glove killer.
The conversation of the main store manager who owns the 51%, I can't remember his name, but he he has the line where he's like, I don't care if they turn this place into a porno shop as long as their check clears, blah, blah, blah. And then after Bill leaves, the framed picture that he has of him and Bill falls off the wall. And then he kind of like looks at it like, oh yeah, me and Bill. Wow, that was pretty good times. And then he literally, frame and all, just puts it in the garbage can, where I was like, holy shit. Like, this guy didn't even really seem like that bad of a guy. He seemed like a corporate guy. He seemed like he was like he owned the store, and now he's trying to sell it off to make some money because it's been losing money for the last 2 years. We get that little tidbit in. And also, like, he does come to Jennifer's defense and like starts punching Craig in the stomach and face and shit like that, and then threatens him like, the police will be the last of your problems. And I was like, holy shit, like, imagine if my store manager started to like punch out a customer who was causing, because we're not allowed to do any of that, right? We can call LP, we can ask people to leave, but I'm not allowed to put hands on people, although I've been asked, because I'm huge, to like get people out of the bathrooms if they're doing drugs or whatever. They're just like, Wes, can you get rid of this guy? I'm like, it's not really my job description, but okay. Usually just seeing me is enough to like get people out of there. But I was like, man, this is the rough and tumble 80s where they will throw hands at fucking people to get them out. But all that doesn't really help him because he gets fucking skewered pretty good. And this sort of signals off onto, I was thinking about The Mutilator while I was watching this as a film that I would almost like. I don't dislike The Mutilator, but I certainly don't love it because there's so much leading up to the kills in this movie or in that movie. There's so much bullshit in The Mutilator that I don't care about the drunk party games. I don't care about the entire film. Just like, yeah, my dad's pretty crazy. Look at all the crazy stuff he does. And they're like, is your dad crazy? Is he going to kill us? Nah, he's not going to do that. But look at anyway. And then of course it's just the dad. It's just like, he's a crazy dad. And that they've been saying from the beginning. This movie gets started with the killing very quickly. So it's not a bunch of kills sandwiched in the last 20 minutes of the film. In fact, it's the other way around. All the kills take place within the first hour, and then the last 20 minutes of this film is you got your final girl and final boy evading the killer. So that is very good in as far as I'm concerned about keeping your interest, because there's always a lot of very graphic and good kills. And you don't really need to go through every single one of them, but like, my God, some of like that box crushing scene with Bud's head is so graphic and so good. And by the way, that happens. Like those old bailing machines were extremely dangerous. And you need to understand, listeners, that a lot of the times in grocery stores, you have a multi-million-dollar building being run by teenagers and college kids. So it doesn't make any sense, but that is the reality. After 6, 7 p.m., there's no adults at all.
Oh, I've even dealt with adults that are like, oh, did you take your women's class? Do you have your PPE? And they're like, what? I did not pay attention to that. I just copied the answers to pass my test. You paid attention to that? And it's like, this is why there are amputees in this day and age due to workplace accidents. Mm-hmm. Like literally because of machines like this and people not paying attention or caring about the training they receive or the gear they're supposed to use while using them. And that is why we have so many labor laws surrounding the workplace now and safety.
In my career, I've worked in grocery stores now for about 20 years, all combined. This has happened 3 different times to my knowledge that I like, where it was like, why is the compactor locked up? Oh, a kid died. And I'm like, oh, this, and especially this old bailing machine. Nowadays, the bailers are part of this huge fucking wall and the doors open almost like a vault and you can't go inside it. But these bailers were on ground level and it was so easy to catch something in the compressor, particularly if you were goofing off clowning around, which the clowning around of a lot of these workers, cutting too deep into product, throwing box cutters around, damaging shit, like that, it happens. That even happens in my store. So like, you know, that's all very
that happens
realistic.
in any store. I've definitely bought a box of cereal with a great big slash across the back of it from a box cutter. It fucking happens. It happens.
Yeah.
I really do enjoy the scene of cutting a box open and lifting out 2 bags of detergent, and the detergent just spills all over the place. I'm like, serves you right, goon.
The amount of shit that has like the amount of shit that I've accidentally broken at the store is so crazy. That's how come when I, like, a poor customer comes in and they like knock open a little clamshell of blackberries and they're like, oh my God, do I have to pay for this? I always like, listen, if you had to pay the $4 for these blackberries for breaking them, I would have to pay $4,000 for all the fucking berries that I've knocked over in my entire life. Like, it is just so a part of the stocking process that no one really pays too close attention to it. But oh man, and that meat slicer kill with what you think would be the final boy in this situation, at least like the guy that's going to live a little bit longer. It's crazy how graphic that is.
It truly is. I like when the butcher, who's not called Butcher Randy or Meat Randy, finds some, like, he's going through the meat and he's like, oh, those are ribs out for tomorrow, and this is requested by so-and-so, and this is reserved meat for so-and-so, and what this it smells horrible. It's going on special tomorrow, that's for sure. And then he pulls out a severed hand that's wrapped up, and he doesn't say it's a hand or look like it's a hand. He's like, what the hell is this? And then boom, he's meat hooked. And I really appreciate that we do have movies that people get meat hooked really good, but this is maybe one of my favorite meat hook moments, I'd say.
It's very good. Ted Ramey's character, first of all, him constantly listening to his headphones is very funny to me, because I love when someone pokes their head in the back when he's cutting that watermelon. It's like, you lost your job, Joe. And he doesn't even pay attention to what's going on, and then finally gets that big old knife in the back of his head, and it cuts his headphones. And another really good big old knife scene is that one dude that gets stabbed through the beer, and all the beer explodes around him. It's just so fucking entertaining to watch. And I know that, like, for horror fans will always get it, right? When you get really excited about the kills and how graphic and gory and interesting they are, so many people get the wrong idea with slashers where, like, when you cut away too much, even people who are like, you kind of are just like ended up like, oh, I guess I'm just watching like a kind of a bad movie with no graphic kills in it. The ho-hum acting and the linear plot line is helped by the gore. That's the money shots. That's what you're really looking for, which is why something with sort of a meandering plot like The Prowler could be one of my most favorite slashers ever, because the kills are so good. This, in turn, the kills are so good, so I don't really mind that there's a ridiculous story that seems to be bubbling on the surface. But let me ask you this, Liz. They present a storyline in this film that it's probably Craig. He's pretty violent. He's had problem with the cops before. He's a no goodnik around town. Ted Ramey even tells a story about how, like, oh yeah, I remember I got into a big fight with him and I kicked his ass. So everyone has had problems with him. Obviously, I don't believe that Ted Ramey beat up the guy, but
no, but I do believe that Bud's brother got into a fight with him too, and that he's never been the same since his dad died. And now we learn that he's gone to jail. So yeah, there's definitely something wrong with this kid, and everyone knows him.
So it's a bit of a red herring, but I also heard through my general reading of things that this was spoiled by not only the trailers, but some of the original poster and VHS art spoils who the killer is. But did you know who the killer was going to be?
To a certain extent, yes, because very near the beginning, and we'll go back to the 2 managers, and if you're worried that it's going to be the stuffed shirt manager, it's not, because he gets killed pretty quickly, or at least we think he's killed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But he is like painted a little bit psychopathic in a way, because like that picture falls and it's cracked and he throws it in the garbage. Maybe a part like psychologically, probably it's like, oh, it's not my relationship with this man represented in this photo. This is now a cracked photo frame, so it's fit for the bin because it is a broken picture frame. It doesn't matter whose picture it is of. It is a broken picture frame, so it's good for the garbage. But during that conversation, Bill had gone to the little window in the ivory tower that overlooks the floor. So he can look out over the store and see the cashiers from this little hidden window in the wall. And it's probably a two-way window like most of them ought to be, or it's that shaded glass, tinted glass or something, where you can look and observe, for security purposes, your store. And not long after, the killer comes in. The killer kills the stuffed shirt manager, and he looks down through this window, and we're like, the only person we knows about this window or would use it like this is Bill. Although we also learn that Bud got his job there because Craig used to work there. So maybe, but my first thought, and we don't learn that till later, my first thought was like, you don't feed an audience something like that without wanting them to put it together, without wanting to play Black Glove Killer, right?
I agree. I went to this film not knowing who the killer was. I did look at the art for the film before I watched it, but not too closely. And I always like to let a movie tell me its story. So when people say that they figure out plot points, my partner Cassandra is so good at figuring out where movies are going. And sometimes when I'm showing them a movie for the first time, 20 minutes into the movie, they know what the fuck is going on. And I know for a fact that I am not the same way, because I'm letting the movie be told to me like a moron. And I'm just like, say the dialogue. Like I don't think ahead, because I don't know. I just have never really been good at that. So mystery films, like you can really get a big reaction from me, because they'd be like, you really didn't figure that out? I was like, no, I was waiting for the movie to tell me.
Well, there's also a generational change. I think there was something between our generations and the younger generations where the goal of watching a movie is to beat the movie in some ways, and to know ahead of time. So I guess so you're not surprised, where we enjoy the element of surprise far more, and will often let a movie, like I'm in the same boat where I'm often like, of course I didn't get it, I was waiting. But when it comes to slashers, giallos, that sort of thing, there's a certain formula that's being followed. They usually will drop some sort of little hint. And I guess that's maybe the key that those younger folks notice and we usually don't. I did notice it in this case. It's also like that Bill character is kind of endearing. It's odd that he doesn't get killed right away, because he tells a really cool story over lunch break about when he used to be a volunteer firefighter. And he's telling the story about the last job he was there was the reason that he quit, because it was just too gory. And there was this guy he worked with, Tucker, who was eating his hamburger when they got the last call, and they rushed to the truck and he's still eating his hamburger. And then they go and they find this decapitated body, and they can't find the head. There's body parts and blood all over, and it's really gross, and they're about to vomit. And here comes Tucker walking down the road, swinging the head in his hand, holding it by its hair, still eating his fucking sandwich. And like, he tells this story, and it's very enchanting. You've already been enchanted by Bill to a certain extent, because he doesn't want the store to close. He wants to make sure other people have other jobs. He even has a friend that's opening a store somewhere else that will be looking for cashiers. Like, he's already warmed up for us. So he's obviously the sort of person that's going to get killed very soon, right? And when he doesn't, you're like, well, there's something up here. Not only does the killer know where that secret manager's window is, he also didn't kill Bill yet.
It's true. Craig and Bill have a scuffle in the alleyway, and Bill gets hit in the head with a hammer So you think, well, maybe he's at least knocked out and maybe he'll show up at the last minute to figure it out. But as characters start dropping, and they start dropping fairly soon and very graphically, you start through process of elimination just saying, okay, so it's either a character that we haven't seen before. Maybe it's this character, Tucker, that Bill was talking about. Maybe they'll just throw that in there. Maybe the whole thing will be, it can't be Craig. It's too obvious. It's too much of a red herring to have him be the killer. But then, you know what? They do that in The Mutilator, as I just said. The whole fucking movie, they're like, it's probably your crazy dad. You think he's going to come to kill us? And yeah, that's literally what it is. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just the guy has a crazy dad who kills them all. So I've seen so many different types of slasher movies that have done so many different techniques about red herrings, some very well and some very terribly. Like everything from Friday the 13th to Pieces, you can point to different movies that have different techniques to try to make you think that a different character is the killer. So I was really not surprised that it was Bill, but there was a point of me that was like a little disappointed, because as much as I love slashers, I like them more when the killer is something cool or has a cool outfit, and he's just, he's Bill. He looks like he works in a grocery store. I'll give him that. Like every old guy at a grocery store looks like fucking Bill. I'm probably going to look like Bill in another 15 years. So I'm just going to like shave off my beard, have a mustache, and my hairline's going to start escaping from the rest of my head, and that'll be that. And the idea of me shaving my beard, Cassandra has a look of pure horror on their face in the corner of the room. I'm not doing it. So the point is I accepted it, but his logic for being a killer is he loves the store so much, Lids. He's put 10 years of his life. Could you imagine anyone putting 10 years of their life into a grocery store? Not me.
I don't know. We've put over 10 years into a podcast. Yeah, I know what you mean. Let alone our work lives. Yeah.
Oh my God. So his logic, if you could help me out here, is if he kills everybody, will they not sell the store?
No, and I think that he sums it up in one of his ratings. When they rediscover Bill, when Bill makes a reappearance, and all is revealed, that he has blood on his hands, quite literally, he says, once I killed the co-owner, I just kept killing. And he's got this like crazed look in his eye. He's very different from the Bill that we had known. And he even recounts his tale from his firefighter days. But I guess he just caught the bug and he was good at it, maybe. He started killing and he liked it. Big, sharp, shiny knives. He really enjoyed it. And he just started killing people, because he doesn't say, I couldn't let you out of here alive and tell people what I'd done, or I have vendettas against everybody, or it's your fault the store is closing. Like, none of those reasons. He literally says, like, once I killed him, I just couldn't stop killing.
It's his twist into the maniacal person really makes you think that he very much relishes into killing, because he doesn't just brutally kill people. And it definitely seems like, since this was Scott Spiegel creating a film based around the fact that he worked at a grocery store in Michigan, he probably had all these ideas like I've had in my entire life, where I'd always think, oh, imagine if someone got caught in that, or imagine if like you use that to kill somebody. Like, imagine, so many things around the grocery store are literally dangerous, right? Imagine if you got caught in this. Imagine if you got stuck here. Imagine if somebody attacked somebody. But imagine if like someone broke into the store and was dangerous. What could I use around me as a weapon? You could kill somebody with like soursop in a grocery bag and just club them over the head with it. The thought processes here, which is what I like so much, is this scratches the itch of Bill does so many things that are like things, the most grotesque and graphic things that you could think of to do in a grocery store. And including like, I'm just going to throw this hand in a lobster tank. What if there's an eye in the olives? What if I'm gonna like wrap up another hand. He loves hands. Like gonna wrap up this stuff into a meat packaging styrofoam. And then other instances where he's gone back and started dismembering the bodies. And it gets a little bit Jason Voorhees where he's arranging bodies and mutilating people. And I'm like, when does he have time to do this? If you pay attention to true crime, dismembering a body is not something that you can do lickety split. It's kind of time consuming.
Well, dude, if you have a meat slicer, you have your time cut in half. No pun intended.
He likes to do jokes like that too. Like the one dude that he bisected and then he put half off sign on his chest and shit like that. It's so fucking good. When Craig re-enters the scene, I guess you're supposed to like, oh good, Craig's here, he can help. But I'm like, are we gonna forget the fact that this guy was literally a creepy, aggressive, like forcing himself on Jennifer Swinebag like 20 minutes ago? Like, I'm sorry, I don't care if they're now fighting for their lives. Like, what are they gonna get back together now? Like, fuck this guy. I would have not minded at all if Craig got killed. He was such a piece of shit.
I give Craig a little bit of leeway here because I think that after an ordeal like this, maybe he'll have his priorities a little straighter and he won't be so fixated on this dream girl or whatever. He'll have a real shock to his system, and maybe it'll straighten him out quite a bit. So I do give him a little bit of a pass. And yeah, they are fighting for their lives, and might as well team up with someone who has a little street smarts, at least for the moment. And as soon as that they're out of danger's way, she can reiterate, look, this does not mean that we're friends, let alone anything else, because I still hate you. But I don't know if they ever really get that sort of chance in life again. But as far as the jokingness, I really like the joking that Bill does when he puts his partner's head on his hand and sticks it out from behind an aisle. And he's like, help me, help me. And they're like, oh no, Mr. So-and-so, let's help him. And they go running, but it's Bill with his partner's head on his hand.
And it's funny because we had seen the owner get his eye skewered by that receipt spike, but he does not die. And the best thing about that is like nobody really ever wants to help him. Where I was like, he's like, help me. And was it Dave, who's the person that Jennifer makes out with a little bit? Yeah. He's like doesn't want anything to do with him. He's like, no, I'm getting the fuck out of here, man. You're on your own with your fucking goopy eyeball. But he does eventually get decapitated anyway, so it doesn't really help him. But then we see like Bill like miming the strut down the hallway, and he's got a sandwich in one hand and the head of the owner in the other. And this is why I wanted to pose the question to you. Is that story about Tucker, is he emulating a killer that he maybe secretly admired? Or is he somehow implying that he was that killer?
It can go either way. And part of me thought while watching that scene, which I loved, and in my mind, the movie could have ended there. And so I don't know if it leaves it open for sequels or whatever. I really like that scene. And that was maybe the best scene in the whole movie to me, is having Bill strutting down the aisle, emulating this story that he had told very clearly. He's a good storyteller in the movie. So you have already envisioned this like sort of rougher guy strutting down the road at night with this decapitated head in one hand like it's no big deal, and eating a sandwich with the other. And he's doing this with a crazed look in his eye. And it made me think, yeah, and maybe that was him. And maybe he knew how off-putting that story was if he were to tell it from his point of view. Like, I found the decapitated head, so I thought, well, I'll bring this back to the guys, and I just kept eating my sandwich, which doesn't have as much impact as far as storytelling goes when you tell it in the third person. But that, or maybe he was just so impressed by that. And a lot of times we are impressed by the things that disturb and disgust us, and it takes several years of sort of working that out in your mind as to what it was about it that was so interesting / impressive.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to not toss the word impressive around when we talk about serial killers because it's fucking not, right?
Right.
But then it also is. The fact that Ted Bundy got away with so many murders for so long in so many states is impressive. The fact that Israel Keyes got away with such brazen murders for years is impressive. Like, not really a word that we want to use. There's maybe not a better one though, but he was definitely impressed by that person, Tucker, if they existed. So it's really hard to tell, although he certainly was impressed by that sort of behavior, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really, really was. Poor Craig's got a little bit of the law of the inverse ninja here. At the beginning of the film, he's able to fight like 5 guys. And at the end of the film, he gets dummied by Bill by himself. The bread man shows up. And when the bread man shows up, I'm looking at the door just being like, is that Bruce Campbell? Because Bruce Campbell is still not shown up. And no, that is Scott Spiegel himself. He was the bread man that gets bonked on the head and murdered. But don't worry, Bruce Campbell's a-coming in a very appropriate cameo. When Craig attacks Bill and theoretically finishes him off with the butcher knife, this is probably the least convincing scene of somebody getting killed by a knife since Psycho. The butcher knife just doesn't seem to really be doing anything, like not penetrating the skin, not really doing anything. You have the actors who are acting as if it's doing damage, but there's no evidence, and the whole rest of the film is so graphic. I was very curious why now you very obviously have an actor hitting another actor with like a rubber meat cleaver, and it's not doing any damage except like red blood being smeared around, I guess.
I have 2 theories with this one, is that either it's the method of this particular group of people that they wanted this scene to look like that, where it's obviously a bouncy knife, or there was another camera angle intended for this, and the pickup shots of the other angle where you could tell it wasn't having any effect on the person, on the victim, were meant for like interstitial cuts, and the other camera failed.
That's a very fair and good theory. I think you're absolutely right about that. Let me ask you this. In closing the film, what do you think of this ending?
Oh my God. I wanted it to end with walking down the aisles with a decapitated head in one hand and a sandwich in the other. Really, honestly, because we could have done without this almost Twin Peaks season 3-esque scream that means nothing. I mean, the cops show up. The killer is laying beside the busted phone booth. The 2 teenagers, or young adults, whatever they're supposed to be, the blonde people, they are covered in blood and screaming, help, help, help. And the cops are like, put them up, drop your weapons. And they're like, it wasn't us, it wasn't us. And then Bill, who's laying on the ground by the phone booth, who's also covered in blood, is just like, it was them, they killed everyone. Oh my God, seriously? And then his eyes fly open crazily, and then Jennifer screams and credits. Like, it makes no sense. No sense at all.
So the first time I watched this film, I was so fucking into this movie. I was like I said, it was a magical experience to me. I was so electrified by how fucking fun this movie was and how much of a good time I was having with it. And that ending was just a bucket of ice water on my crotch. It just sucked so much. And because the implication that the filmmakers are trying to say is they defeated the killer, but now they're going to be blamed for the murders because the killer said they did it. And then I guess it looked like he died, but then his eyes flew open again, so he's not dead. But who cares? Like they obviously didn't commit the crimes, and there's going to be a million ways to fucking prove that. And even if they get arrested now, they're not going to prison. They're not going to prison for this fucking shit. And if the killer's alive, all the better reason, because if you've ever seen a maniacal killer getting questioned by police, they're nitwits. They're the worst liars in the world. They fucking say things that don't make sense, and they get tripped up in 2 seconds flat. So, like, and it's just so dumb. I agree with you. It should have ended. They could have done that Twin Peaks scream, like when he was walking towards her, and then just cut to credits, and the implication would be like, I guess he killed her, or who knows. But yeah, this whole ending, and by the way, there's your Bruce Campbell. He's one of the cops. He's like, quiet there, buddy. Oh, you're under arrest. You're going away for a long time. I'm like, the beat cops aren't in control of that. They're just doing the arrest. Like, The arresting officer, I don't care how small the town is, the arresting officer is not the person that's like, and off to prison you go. Like, that's not how it works. So that fell very flat to me, and it wasn't good. But it doesn't mean the movie's dog shit and unwatchable. It just means that I can't really recommend it to a person the way that I recommend back pocket slashers that I have, that in my mind are like perfect films. They encapsulate the genre perfectly. This is a solid story. It has amazing kills, and the ending's pretty bad. So I'll always put that in there as like, don't think that when we're watching this movie, I don't know that this ending stinks. Like, don't think that at all.
No, it does. It absolutely stinks. The things where I started laughing so much, and it was also reinforced by watching this with my darling husband, Christopher, who had pointed out a few times, like, wow, I've always wanted to know the point of view of a garbage can. Well, I've always wanted to know the point of view of a dustpan. Well, I've always wondered what it would look like from inside a rotary telephone, because the camera placement choices throughout this movie are hilarious. And I would be laughing my ass off at some of these point of view shots. And some of them are ingenious. You know, someone takes something off a shelf and the camera, it was behind that product, and then the camera follows them through it. So there's like that invisible wall kind of thing. Like, I really like some of those very inspired camera motions. And for it being a debut film at the time, it was a very, very well put together film. Too many artistic and experimental shots, though, and some conversations taking place from above the characters on an angle, Dutch tilt through a shelf. Okay, I get you really, really, really want to soak up this grocery store experience, but nobody will be observing human beings talking like that. And then to switch camera angles, so you're doing a two-shot. Like, you should not do a two-shot elevated Dutch tilt through scenery. Like, it's just very strange choices. And I was laughing my ass off at that. So if you're the type of person who is really looking for production value, aside from the sound quality being a little poor and too many experimental camera angles, you would probably tire of this film if you are Android Dungeon level critic.
I wonder if those camera angles are coming from the fact that Scott Spiegel worked on all of those Super 8 films and Evil Dead with Sam Raimi, who's very famous for wanting extremely difficult shots, up to the point in which shots in which they had no technology for, because he just kind of came up with it on the fly, and it caused tons of problems. I'm wondering if, you know, you're Scott Spiegel and this is your movie, but you got Sam Raimi on set with you. Yeah. Like, maybe a lot of these shots came from conversations with Sam where he was like, hey pal, you know, it'd be really cool. What if we, put the camera in the POV of the phone, right? No one will expect that coming. Maybe they'll think the phone's the killer. That's
3 hours later, he's still trying to fucking crank the dial thing out of the phone so he can get it to shine through, and then realizing that the little holes aren't there, so he has to take a piece of cardboard and cut it around and cut out all the little holes. Yeah. I can see that.
It could be that. I think that, I agree. It is very unusual, but hey, you know what? At least it's not boring. I'll give them that.
Very true. I agree. And like I said, it is a little bit all on your own. You can have the Bob's Drive-In or the Mystery Science Theater or Riff Tracks experience all by yourself and laugh along with this film. Whether you are holding it to a very high degree as far as a cult classic slasher film, or looking at it as, a strange debut experiment.
One thing I'll point out is, just speaking about the fact that this was a functioning grocery store, I will say that there's definitely shots in this film that make the back rooms look like fucking dungeons. Like concrete, dirty metal. And listen, the back rooms of grocery stores can be, like, they are concrete and metal. It's a workplace. The floors are scuffed to all high heaven because you have literally tens of thousands of products moving around back there all day. You have heavy machinery equipments, forklifts, all kinds of stuff back there. But to the point in which, like, Randy's meat locker looked very unhygienic, and I was like, woof, like I don't know how I'd feel going into because I will say this much, like every place where we store meat that I've ever seen in a grocery store is well lit and quite clean. So that's one thing. But it was very interesting. There was parts of me that was wondering if it was a functioning grocery store because of, obviously it looks like a functioning grocery store. But then there was other parts where I was wondering, did they just purposefully make this as dark and dreary and creepy as possible to make it seem even worse? Because they do dim the lights overnight in our store as well, and it gets dark, but it's not that dark. You know what I'm saying?
I think they were using different areas for that. Like, it was a closed grocery store that they had rented for this film, so they kind of had their run at the place, but the like a closed and empty grocery store that they filled and stocked themselves. So they would have had the run of the place, and maybe they liked the look of the staging area with its concrete and wet floors, and nothing but pallets of stacks of boxes would have been in there. It wasn't really for meat because there wasn't like that many meat things, like meat preparation things in there.
Yeah.
There was some foam trays and a couple knives and a meat slicer, and that does not make a grocery store meat department whatsoever. So I think they might have moved it into this more dreary place for atmosphere.
You know, it's fucking crazy that I thought of just one last point about my experience in grocery stores. For all the cereal boxes that have changed over the years, all of the products that look different in 1989 that they do in 2022, you know, it looks exactly the same. That has not fucking changed one bit. All the boxes that shit comes in the alleyway, when I was looking at some of the boxes, and even in Produce Joe's area, I was looking at some of the boxes that were in the background, and I was like, none of this has changed after all of these years. Like a banana box, an iceberg lettuce box, they look exactly the same as they did in 1989 as they do in 2022. Why mess with success?
I guess so, yeah. Those banana boxes did look exactly the same. Everything did that. That's really weird. Even with some of the boxes I remember, because we used to go to almost like a Costco type place when I was younger that was very, very discounted. And you could buy like the whole box, like it came to the back room. And from time to time we would do that. So yeah, I've seen a lot of those boxes, and you're right, they don't really change.
Yeah. So what do we got next for them?
Coming up next, we have decided to do Children of the Corn. And this is hot off the presses because we literally just decided this. Children of the Corn, Stephen King, Summertime, Malachi. What more do you need? Now, when I was very little, this was one of the first horror movies I was introduced to by way of another person, not something that my mother was watching or that I noticed in the rental store. This was, my cousin Jason was like, oh my God, you need to see Children of the Corn. It gave me nightmares. It kept me up. It was crazy. And I've watched it like 6 times because he was so scared. It made him so uneasy. And it was the beginning of my fascination with rural horror, because a lot of the time horror movies had, you know, architect dads and stuff like that, you know, mumbly, whiny children, or it took place in a school or high school, a lot of high schoolers. But this was kids my age-ish and a countryside setting, which is like very much more close to what I grew up with. I didn't have an architect dad buying a house sight unseen or I didn't go to high school, so I couldn't relate to all these horror movies. But being very young at the time, or maybe too young to watch this, but thoroughly enjoyed it. I've only watched it a couple times since. I've been waiting for a box set like they have in the UK to come here, so I'm very eagerly awaiting a box set of Children of the Corn.
Yeah, I'll be excited to revisit it. I haven't seen it in a little while. I have it on VHS of all things, and I believe it's also on Shudder. So I will definitely check that out. But yeah, I remember watching this film. We had it on VHS, not the one that I have, but it taped on VHS when I was growing up. So this was a film that was readily available on Alta Vista Drive in that shaggy carpeted basement.
Lovely, lovely. Well, I am very, very pleased.
You're pleased, and I'm Wes Knipe.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And I just hit my hand on a metal table. Fuck, that hurt. You've been listening to Dead Air.